distraction is not a character flaw. It's not a moral failing. For the vast majority of people, there's nothing wrong with your brain. People think, oh, I have undiagnosed ADHD, or even people who have diagnosed ADHD, especially as adults, the vast majority of them are misdiagnosed or overdiagnosed. Frankly, it's not about any of those things. It's not a moral failing. It's not a character flaw. It's not a broken brain. It's simply a skill set, right? Pills don't teach skills. We need to have this skill set to deal with discomfort. And so this is the skill of the century, is being able to control your attention, because controlling your attention is truly how you choose your life. And so this is why I think this is the critical skill of the century, because if you think the world is distracting now, just wait a few years. Between virtual reality, augmented reality, and everything else that's happening in reality, the future really will be controlled by people who can control their attention. What I learned in my decade of research now into the psychology of distraction is that 90% of our distractions begin from.
So do you think that at this current moment of time, we are the most distracted we've ever been with things like social media and all this technology going on? Is this the most distracted we've ever been as humanity?
It's a great question. And I think it starts with a historical perspective, because you're asking, is it the most in history? So we don't want to pull a Trump and say, you know, how Trump always says this is the most ever thing that's ever happened. I think it's important. Yeah, I think it's important to back up and realize that distraction is not a new problem. It's very hard to quantify, you know, is this the worst time for distraction in history? But it is, I think, important to understand this is not a new problem. That we know that Plato, 2,500 years ago, the Greek philosopher, talked about this problem of distraction. He called it in the Greek akrasia, the tendency to do things against our better interests. And so if people have been struggling with distraction, complaining about distraction 2,500 years before the internet, it can't be the internet's fault, right? This is not a new problem. It's not something that just our smartphones invented and start all of a sudden now we're all distracted. This is part of the human condition, because at least for the past 2,500 years, people have been complaining about it. Now, it is something that really only the elites struggled with. Because let's face it, and it's still today, right? If you are struggling with this high-class problem of too many interesting things to do with your time, that's a wonderful problem, right? Because most people, for most of human history, for 200,000 years, were living hand-to-mouth. So really, you know, Plato was part of the aristocracy. Plato had time on his hands. And so now what used to be something that only very, very few people could enjoy, which was leisure time, is now something that many more people have access to. We know that the average American spends 5 hours a day watching television. That doesn't even include time on their phones. 5 hours a day of television on average, according to Nielsen. So I think it's become, you know, to answer your question, I think more people struggle with distraction today because that is a result of the abundance we have of things to do with our time. Boredom is, for the first time in human history, not a problem for a lot of people who have access to smartphones and the internet. Well, you've got an instant entertainment device in your pocket. So I wouldn't say it's a new problem. It's certainly not a new problem. I will say, if you are looking for distraction, it's easier than ever to find. Because it's all right here, right? Anything you want is right here in your pocket. So yeah, I think as a global problem, it is probably worse than ever because more people have access to distraction, and distraction is easier to find than ever before.
Yeah, I've also heard you talk about how the Romans described like the younger generation at the time. What were some of the things that they were saying? Because it's eerily similar to what we're saying these days.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Brian, right? Every generation, we literally have, you know, tablet records of people saying, oh, the kids these days with their distractions and their morals, and they're all wayward, you know, they're not like we used to be when we were kids. And so, the history of moral panics goes back to time immemorial. When I was, today it's all about social media and our phones and, our devices are distracting us. Before that, it was the television. In my generation, we were called couch potatoes because we watched too much television. And before that, it was the radio was distracting people. And before that, it was the novel. People were literally saying about how books were going to melt people's brains because they were such such frivolity, when what they should really be doing is going to work and prayer and not wasting their time on silly stories and books. So every new form of media elicits this very predictable moral panic. Now, the idea here, if you want to really go above the noise, if you want to be smarter than the average individual, is to appreciate the fact that, yes, there is a trap here around distraction, that every new form of media is progress, right? The fact that we keep getting distracted that is actually a sign of a progressing society, right? The fact that we have all these potential distractions, that's not necessarily a problem. It's progress. What are we going to tell, hey, Netflix, stop making so many interesting shows. I want to watch them all the time. Hey, Apple, your devices are too user-friendly. Can you please stop that? No, this is the price of progress. The price of living in an age of so much abundance is that for the very few who understand how to manage all this abundance, this is the best time in history to be alive. Now, for everybody else, that bifurcation is happening between people who allow their time and attention to be controlled and manipulated by others, and they're going to be, sheeple, as always happens, that the majority is just kind of led by whoever can capture their attention and their time. And there are people who say, no, I will not allow you to control my time and attention. I'm going to decide for myself, based on my values, how I'll control my time and attention, because I am indistractable. And that's really who I wrote my book for, are the people who don't want to be sheeple like everybody else, not guided by whatever frivolity is happening in the media, but rather people who want to live their lives according to their values and to look back on their life and say, hey, I lived to my utmost. I have a life that was not full of regret because of some stupid crap happening in the news or on my phone, but rather I lived a life based on my values and my moral system, and I spent my time the way I wanted to.
You just mentioned the term indistractable, and it's funny, when I was you made up this term, correct?
Right.
Yeah, so when I was when I think I typed it in my notes, and the red squiggly bar came up, and I was like confused. And then later on in the research I did, you said that you made up the word. So what can you define what indistractable means? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I came up with this term, and the idea is that a person who's indistractable is someone who is as honest with themselves as they are with others. One of the worst epithets you can call someone is to call someone a liar. Nobody wants to be called a liar. That really hurts if someone calls you a liar. And yet, if we're honest with ourselves, don't we lie to ourselves every single day? We say we're going to exercise, we don't. We say we're going to eat right, but we'll skip a good meal and have a cheap meal instead. We say we're going to start saving money and accomplish our goals. We say we're going to write that novel, start that business, spend more time with our family. All these things we know we should do. We all know what to do, basically. And yet we don't do them. And so we're lying to ourselves every single day. So an indistractable person is a person who strives to be as honest with themselves as they are with others. And that's what being indistractable is all about. Now, does that mean you never get distracted? No, I still get distracted from time to time. But here's the difference. An indistractable person understands why they got distracted so they can do something about it. Paulo Coelho had a wonderful quote. He said, a mistake repeated more than once is a decision. Such a good quote. A mistake repeated more than once is a decision. So how many times can we complain about our cell phone and social media and YouTube and our boss and our kids and whatever before we do something about the damn problem? So a distractible person keeps getting distracted by the same things over and over and then lives a life full of regret. Whereas an indistractable person says, okay, I see what you did there the first time. You distracted me once, but I'm not going to let that happen again. And I'm going to take steps today to prevent getting distracted tomorrow. That's what becoming an indistractable person is all about.
Why is it that we lie to ourselves so much then? Because like you said, we know what we have to do, but we just don't do it. It's almost like it's subconscious sometimes. Where does that come from?
Absolutely. I think it's an evolutionary instinct inborn into us that evolution, in fact, favored distractibility in many ways, right? For a few reasons. One, that we have what's called a negativity bias, that we always look for things that might hurt us. By the way, this is the news media's entire business model. When you turn on CNN or Fox News or the New York Times or any media company, it's blood and guts, right? I went to journalism school. The first rule of journalism is if it bleeds, it leads. The news media doesn't tell you what's important for your life. It doesn't tell you what you should know. It tells you what you biologically want to know. You want to know about things that scare you. Why? Because 200,000 years on the plains of the Serengeti, when our species first evolved, the bad stuff was the most important, right? The good things are nice, but the bad things can kill you. So we have this penchant for negativity. We're always on watch, right? We're always looking out for something that might hurt us. We're also looking out for potential opportunities. Thirdly, we hate boredom. That feeling of boredom is what's called an internal trigger. It's this uncomfortable emotional state that we seek to escape. So the confluence of those three things, our negativity bias, our search for rewards, our constant search for opportunities, and our aversion to boredom kind of sets us up naturally, biologically, for constantly looking for distraction. Now, just because those are our natural instincts that lead us towards distraction doesn't mean we can't overcome those things. There's all kinds of unnatural behaviors that we learn, right? We're all potty trained. That's not natural, right? Like we didn't have toilets, 200,000 years ago. And yet now we train ourselves to read. Reading is not natural, right? There's nothing biological about reading. It's something you learn to do. Thank goodness. And so this is the skill of the century, is being able to control your attention, because controlling your attention is truly how you choose your life. And so this is why I think this is the critical skill of the century, because if you think the world is distracting now, just wait a few years. Between virtual reality, augmented reality, and everything else that's happening in reality, the future really will be controlled by people who can control their attention.
So let's talk about how to control our attention. So in your book, you say that 10% of distractions are external and 90% are internal. I feel like people think that switch the other way around,
right,
where the majority
absolutely.
is external, like their phone or loud, like music or loud noises. So can you break that down a little bit, the difference between internal and external distractions?
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of approach this with that mentality as well, that the things that I thought were distracting me were all these things outside of me. It's my phone, it's my kid, it's my boss, it's my email, all this stuff outside of me was the source of my distraction. And those are called external triggers, things in your environment that tell you what to do next. Turns out, studies have found that when we look at why people get distracted, those external triggers only account for about 10% of our distractions, 10%. 90% of the time that we get distracted, 90%, 90, is not because of what's happening outside of us, but rather what I learned in my decade of research now into the psychology of distraction is that 90% of our distractions begin from within. These are called internal triggers. What are internal triggers? Boredom, loneliness, fatigue, uncertainty, anxiety. This is the source of 90% of our distractions, because distraction is not a character flaw. It's not a moral failing. For the vast majority of people, there's nothing wrong with your brain. People think, oh, I have undiagnosed ADHD, or even people who have diagnosed ADHD, especially as adults, the vast majority of them are misdiagnosed or overdiagnosed. Frankly, it's not about any of those things. It's not a moral failing. It's not a character flaw. It's not a broken brain. It's simply a skill set, right? Pills don't teach skills. We need to have this skill set to deal with discomfort, to deal with loneliness, boredom, fatigue, uncertainty, anxiety, without constantly trying to escape it, right? Most people, distractible people, when they feel bored, when they feel lonesome, when they feel uncertain, they have to drink it away, they have to smoke it away, they have to click it away, they have to scroll it away. Whereas that is not the source of the problem. The real source of the problem is our inability to deal with discomfort in a healthy way rather than a harmful way. And so that is really the skill of the century, is learning that 90% of the time that you check your phone, it's not because of a beep, buzz, or boop. It's because of a feeling. Because when we boil it all down, all human motivation, everything you do, is about the desire to escape discomfort. Everything you do. So that must therefore mean that time management is pain management. In fact, money management is pain management. Weight management, it's all pain management, which to me I think is very empowering, as opposed to saying, oh, it's some evil corporation that's hijacking my brain. That's BS. At the end of the day, 90% of the time that we get distracted, it's simply because we don't know how to deal with our emotions. But we can learn that skill. It's an essential skill of the century. And so that's really the first step to becoming indistractable, is to master those internal triggers, or they will become your master.
So when we feel those internal triggers coming, what's the first thing we should do? What's step number one? When we feel that uncomfort, we feel that boredom, what's the first thing we should do?
Yeah. So the most important thing you can do is to recognize that sensation, as opposed to what your brain will desperately try and convince you of, is that it's a valid reason to escape. So your brain hates feeling discomfort. Again, all human motivation, everything you do is about the desire to escape discomfort. So what we will oftentimes do is rationalize that discomfort. We'll think to ourselves, oh, I need to do a bit of research, or let me just check email for a quick minute, or I need to stay up to date, or what if somebody needs me? And these are nothing more than emotions. It's fear, it's uncertainty, it's doubt, it's these uncomfortable sensations that we don't know what to do with. So the very first step is simply being one of the very small proportion of the population that can recognize those internal triggers, that can understand, wait a minute, does somebody really need me right now? Do I really need to check email at this moment? Or is it that I'm trying to escape an uncomfortable sensation? So that's step number one, is recognizing that sensation. And so I, for example, keep by my desk this little notepad at all times and a pen, so that when I have a task at hand that I need to stay focused on, if I can simply note the sensation, boredom, fatigue, uncertainty, anxiety, if I can just write down that sensation and bring awareness to it, that's step number one. That's one of that's probably the most important thing you can do, is to be aware that it's just a subjective feeling. It's not an objective fact. It's a feeling, right? It's your interpretation of what the emotion that creates that feeling. So that's a very, very big important step. And there's about a dozen different things you can do to master internal triggers. But I would say that's the very first one.
So what's after that? Is there anything else after that we can do?
Sure. So what I offer in the book is kind of a menu, because not every technique works for everyone, right? I'm not one of these people who says, "Oh, meditation is the answer for everything." Yeah, meditation works for some people. Mindfulness works for some people. It does not work for everyone in all circumstances. In fact, for many people, meditation and mindfulness can actually backfire. You know, we have cases now of meditation disease, meditation sickness that people can get way too into their heads. Anyway, that's a whole other discussion. But what I wanted to offer people is a menu that you can use, a dozen different techniques, that when you feel these uncomfortable internal triggers, you can take out a tool, just like you would open up a toolbox and figure out what works for you, and then apply that. So for me, I'll tell you what I do. So I've been a professional author now for over a decade. I've written 2 bestsellers. I've written thousands of articles, been in the New York Times, The Atlantic. And I will tell you that writing is never easy. It's always super freaking hard. And trying to make it into a habit, people say, there's kind of a culture now of we want everything to become a habit. And let me tell you, you can't turn everything into a habit. We can actually talk about it, if it's interesting, why I think we've reached peak habits, why habits are not always the solution to every problem. Because to do these difficult tasks, you have to learn how to deal with discomfort. So I'll tell you very personally what I do when I need to write, right? I'm a professional author and researcher, and so I need to spend a lot of time reading boring academic papers and writing, which is really hard. All I want to do when I'm writing is to go Google something or watch something on YouTube or do something under the cloak of research, when really I'm just trying to distract myself from doing the hard work. A technique that I use almost every single day is called the 10-minute rule. And this isn't something I invented. This has been around for a very long time from acceptance and commitment therapy. And the 10-minute rule acknowledges that you can give in to any distraction, whether it's checking YouTube, whether it's eating that piece of chocolate cake if you're on a diet, whether it's smoking that cigarette if you're trying to quit, doesn't matter. Anything that is not what you intended to do, you can give in to that distraction, but not right now. You can give in to it in 10 minutes, okay, in 10 minutes from now. The idea here is that you're diffusing what we call psychological reactance. Reactance is our very natural instinct that all of us have, that when we are told what to do, we rebel. So if you've ever had a boss that micromanaged you, if you remember when you were a kid, your mom would tell you to put on a coat because it's cold outside, and you say, "Don't tell me what to do." That feeling of being bossed around, that's reactance. Now, the crazy thing about the way our brain is wired is that you can elicit reactance even if you are telling yourself what to do. Right? Isn't that ridiculous? Or even when you say, "I want to do one thing," if you tell yourself, "No, you can't do it, just say no, abstain," right? It can actually backfire. It can actually make you want it more. And this is why strict abstinence doesn't really work. So these professors who tell you, "Oh, stop using social media, stop checking emails, stop using your device," yeah, that might work for you. It doesn't work for most people who have a real job, who don't have tenure. You can't just disconnect. You can't just stop checking email. So a much better technique, rather than strict abstinence and telling yourself no, is to tell yourself "not yet." Okay? You're not saying no. You're a grown adult. You can do whatever you want. You're not saying no. You're saying "not yet." So you're saying, I choose to check my device, to go on YouTube, to check email, whatever it is that might be causing you the distraction. You can do that in 10 minutes. So many times what I'll do is I'll set my watch for a 10-minute timer. I'll take a deep breath, and now I have a choice to make. I can either get back to the task at hand, go back to the writing in my case, or I can do what's called surf the urge. Surf the urge for those 10 minutes, okay, for as long as it takes until I'm ready to get back on that task. Now, surfing the urge acknowledges that these uncomfortable sensations, they're like waves. They crest and then they subside. And so your job as someone who is surfing the urge is to ride that emotional wave like a surfer on a surfboard. Because what most people don't realize is that these emotions in the moment, we think they're going to last forever because they're screaming at you. I'm bored. I'm tired. I'm uncertain. I'm scared. I'm lonely. They're screaming at you, and you don't realize in the moment that these emotions are like waves. They just come and go. Nobody's angry forever or bored forever or uncertain forever. They just come and go. So if you can ride that wave like a surfer on a surfboard for just a few minutes, you'll find that you'll naturally get back to the task at hand. Now, what do you do for those 10 minutes? There's many different techniques, as I mentioned earlier. I want to give you all kinds of tools. One technique that I use all the time when I'm surfing the urge is a personal mantra. Now, I'm going to share with you my personal mantra. You can steal it. You can make up your own, whatever you want to do. My personal mantra goes like this. I'll take a deep breath, and I'll say to myself, this is what it feels like to get better. This is what it feels like to get better. And just saying that to myself 2 or 3 times acknowledges that it's not my fault that I feel crappy, right? That's my emotions trying to get me to distraction, trying to get me to escape this uncomfortable situation, right? But that's what it takes to get better at something. Everything worth having in life is on the other side of discomfort. So if you can lean into that discomfort and say, okay, this is part of the process. This is part of what it takes to get better at something, then it's not so bad. I can accept that discomfort. And 9 times out of 10, if I just repeat that mantra, and I'm talking about maybe 10, 15 seconds, I'll get back to that task at hand. What you don't want to do, what you want to break the habit of, is every time I feel discomfort, every time I feel bored, lonesome, indecisive, uncertain, I got to escape it. I got to click it away. I got to scroll it away, right? That's what you want to break. That's that really unhealthy cycle of distraction you want to get out of. So as long as you have a toolkit that you can use a 10-minute rule, you can use a mantra, you can surf the urge, there's a dozen other techniques that you can use. That's personally what I use almost every single day. And when you do that, what you're doing is you're proving to yourself, wait a minute, I can do this, right? These devices, they don't control me. I'm not addicted, right? It's simply that I like escaping from that discomfort. But what you're proving to yourself is that, wait a minute, I can do 10 minutes. And if 10 minutes is too long, do 5 minutes, right? So what you're going to do is that the 5-minute rule is going to turn into the 7-minute rule, is going to turn into the 10-minute rule, is going to turn into the 15-minute rule, is going to turn into the 20-minute rule. And you're going to find one day you're saying, hey, wait a minute, what was I even complaining about? These distractions don't control me. I can control them.
So what I'm hearing in a way is that the more resistance you have to those distractions, the more likely you are to reach for your phone. The more likely you are to have those distractions. The more you resist it and push to not do it. And I also find too that when you like you said, that 10-minute rule, when you like have like a time period where you're working, and then after that is like you get to do whatever you want, you get to be distracted. During that time you're working, there's almost like a relief in a way that you know that in 30 minutes when I'm done with this, then I can distract myself. I feel like most people, let's say if they have to like study for a test or study for an exam, they just like okay, I'm gonna go and I'm not gonna stop, and like they just like sit at a desk and just work like the entire time, and during that they get really uncomfortable, so then they whip out their phone every once in a while and just check their phone every time they feel discomfort, which happens pretty often, right?
Yeah. So a few really, really important things there that you hinted at. One is that we need to schedule time. So step number 1 is master internal triggers. If you can't master your internal triggers, they will become your masters. You have to figure out tactics to deal with that discomfort. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is making time for traction. Okay. What is traction? Well, traction is the opposite of distraction, right? When you say them together, you understand their opposites. Traction, distraction. Traction is any action that pulls you towards your goals, towards your values, helps you become the kind of person you want to become. Those are acts of traction. The opposite, distraction, is anything that is not what you said you were going to do in advance. So a big mistake that people make is that they only schedule the stuff that's productive. Right? I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And they use a to-do list. And by the way, we should talk about why to-do lists are one of the worst things you can do for personal productivity. We can get back to that in a minute. What they fail to schedule is the fun stuff, right? I want you to schedule time for video games or social media or Netflix or meditation or prayer or taking a walk, whatever it is that's fun for you. When you do that, you are turning a distraction, something that you are doing for emotional relief, right? You're using it as a pacifier. Oh, I can't deal with this discomfort of doing my work. Let me suck on this pacifier of social media to make me feel better like a baby. Versus saying, I'm going to plan time in my day to go on social media. In my calendar, there's time for social media. I love social media. There's nothing wrong with social media. We need to stop vilifying it and medicalizing it and moralizing it. If that's what you want to do, you want to watch TV, you want to watch Netflix, you want to go on YouTube, whatever it is, do it. But do it on your schedule. Why? Because when you plan time for it, when you turn distraction into traction, now your brain doesn't have to constantly think about it. You're not constantly thinking, oh, when can I play that video game? When can I go on social media? When can I read the news? Whatever it is that distracted you, you know when you can do it. It's on your schedule. That's number one. Number two, you can moderate how much time you think is good for you, right? So if you say, hey, you know what? An hour of playing video games is about right. That's how much I want to play video games per day, right? Based on my values. What are values? The definition of values, my definition of values, are attributes of the person you want to become. Attributes of the person you want to become. How much time would the person I want to become spend time playing video games? Whatever it is for you. I'm not going to tell you how much time. It's your life, right? 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, 10 hours. I don't care. As long as it's what you said you were going to do in advance, okay? So by turning these distractions into tractions, that's how we get control over them, by putting them in our schedule based on how much time we want to spend on them. The other thing I wanted to mention about where this mentality comes from, it comes from this to-do list mentality. You were saying earlier, your friend that says, oh, I need to finish this task. I'm going to, here's 5 hours. I'm going to work on it all day long. I'm going to get it done. And it almost never happens because, oh, I got so much time. Yeah, sure, I'll get it done. I've got all day to do it. Those are typically our least productive days. Why? Because we're measuring ourselves by the wrong thing. This is why to-do lists are so dangerous. To-do lists suck. I'll tell you why. Because when we have a to-do list mentality, we measure ourselves by how many cute little boxes we check off, right? Isn't that the goal of a to-do list? To finish all those things you're supposed to do? But the problem is, most people succumb, and we're talking like 99% of the population, we succumb to the planning fallacy. We know that on average, people take 3 times longer to finish a task than they estimate because of this planning fallacy. We're really bad at planning how long a task will take us. Why is that? Because a to-do list has no feedback. Here's what happens when you have a to-do list. By the way, this is me. I used to totally do this. I would look at my to-do list and say, okay, I got that big task I'm going to work on. Okay, let me start. I'm going to work on it for 5 minutes. Here I go. I'm working away. And you know what? My coffee cup's kind of empty. Maybe I should go refill my coffee cup. And while I'm there, oh, look, Janice is there. I haven't seen her in a long time. And we start chitty-chatting. And then I get back to my desk 30 minutes later. Wait a minute. What was I working on again? Oh, I totally forgot. And so we have no idea how long things take us, as opposed to a much better technique, and what I espouse in Indistractable, is to use what's called a time box calendar, which is way more studied, right? So in my book, there's about 30 pages of citations to peer-reviewed studies. There's almost no studies showing the effectiveness of to-do lists, even though most people use to-do lists. A much better technique is a time box calendar, where what you're doing, the first step is, of course, to take things out of your brain, put them on a piece of paper, put them in a to-do list. That's fine. It's okay to get things out of your brain. I recommend that. But don't run your life on that to-do list. Don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, I've got all these things to do. What should I do? No. You do what's in your schedule. You do what's on your calendar. You time box. Because then you can say, all right, I'm going to work on this task, and the goal is not to finish. What's this guy talking about, right? I thought you brought on a personal productivity expert. What's he talking about? Not to finish. Here's the thing. When you start measuring yourself, not on how many cute little boxes you checked off, that's the wrong metric. Rather, did I do what I said I was going to do for as long as I said I would without distraction? That's the only metric that matters. I'm going to say that again. Did I do what I said I was going to do for as long as I said I would without distraction? And that doing could be working on a big project. It can be playing video games. It can be being with your kids. It can be anything that you said you were going to do in advance. Okay? Now, when you say that, you say, okay, I'm going to work on this presentation for 30 minutes. That's all I'm going to do. I don't care if I finish. I'm just going to do that task for 30 minutes without distraction. That's it. Now you can start saying to yourself, okay, I worked on that test for 30 minutes. I finished 3 slides. I need 30 slides in my entire presentation. That means I need 9 more time boxes to get the task done. And for the first time, you will have a feedback loop to figure out how long things take. And that's how you escape this planning fallacy problem. So to-do lists are nice as a first step. Get things out of your brain, get them on a piece of paper. That's fine. But people forget the most important part, which is to put it in your schedule and not track how many cute boxes you check off. Because you know what people do when they start tracking boxes? They do the easy stuff. They do the fun stuff, right? They do the urgent stuff, not the important stuff that moves their career forward and their life forward. So to-do lists are way, way worse than time box schedules. A time box schedule is turning your values into time, much, much more effective technique.
I also find with doing a time box calendar is it really helps with procrastination too, because there's less hesitancy about like what you need to do. I feel like if you have all that, like an overwhelming list of all the stuff you have to do, and it's going to be very overwhelming. But instead, if you have a calendar that says, oh, it's 3:00, I got to start doing this, I got to start writing, I got to start doing this, there's a lot less hesitation and
so true.
And procrastination, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the idea is that you're modifying it from day to day. You never modify your time box calendar in the day. That's a big mistake. Once you set your calendar for the day, that's it. It's locked in. You cannot divert from it as much as you possibly can. Of course, sometimes you're going to get distracted. That happens. You're going to learn from it. The idea is to make it easier to follow. So what happens to most people is that they're too ambitious at first, right? Oh, I'm gonna write my book for 3 hours today. Well, that almost never happens. It's really hard to write for 3 hours straight. Rather than they dial it back over time and say, you know what, let me try 30 minutes. Can I do it for 30 minutes? Oh, that's too much? No problem. Tomorrow I'm gonna try for 15 minutes and see if I can do it without distraction. And by doing that, you're making your calendar easier to follow over time. So for example, I used to work out first thing in the morning. And then I found, you know what, I really don't like working out first thing in the morning. I got to get myself out of bed. I don't really feel like it. It's just a bad vibe. No problem. That day I had to do what I put on my schedule, but for tomorrow I'm free to change it, right? To make it easier and easier to follow. So the right mindset is not to be a drill sergeant, right? It's not, oh, I have to do this exactly as I said I would do it on my schedule. No. The right mindset is to be a scientist. The job of a scientist is to make a hypothesis, run an experiment, look at the results of that experiment, and then run new experiments based on the results. So every day is an experiment, and your job is to make that schedule easier and easier to follow by time boxing the best possible schedule to meet your values at the end of the day.
So I've heard you say that low performers spend more time doing reactive work, and this is something that I've been thinking about a lot with my business and my podcast is, yes, there's that like reactive day-to-day stuff. Then there's also the long-term vision, and you have to like actually make sure that you're heading in the right direction, because I mean, you could be working as hard as you can, but if you're working on the wrong, if you're going not heading in the right direction, it's all kind of pointless. Yeah, and totally. So why is it that if you spend more time, well, first of all, what is reactive work? What do you mean by what's our examples of stuff that are just reactive instead of long-term?
So we have two kinds of work. We have reactive work and we have reflective work. Reactive work is how most low performers spend their entire day. Reacting to emails, reacting to notifications, reacting to taps on the shoulder from their boss. Reactive work is, being responsive to all these demands, these external triggers. Reflective work is the kind of work that can only be done without distraction. Planning, strategizing, thinking, for God's sakes, requires you to work without distraction. That's reflective work. Now, the reason people love reactive work is because it's cognitively much easier, right? I don't want to have to think about whether I'm working on the right stuff. That's really hard to do. That requires a lot of mental horsepower. Am I working according to my values? Am I going in the right direction? Am I spending my time the way I want to spend my time? Are we doing the right things in my business? That requires some heavy lifting. So what low performers love to do is to work on the small stuff. I don't know what to do right now. Let me check email. Email will tell me what to do. I don't know what to do right now. Let me check my Slack channel. That'll tell me what to do. So we get habituated to suppressing that feeling of uncertainty in the workplace by just doing reactive work all day long, right? Thinking that we're productive by flushing out our email inbox. Why is that productive? Yeah, it's work related, but if you don't plan time for that reflective work, if you don't at least make some time in your day to say, wait a minute, am I working on the right stuff? Am I planning time to be creative, to focus, to concentrate? If I'm not planning that time, I promise you're going to run real fast in the wrong direction. And there's no greater waste of time than working on stuff you didn't need to be working on. But of course, that feels good. It feels productive. Look how much stuff I got done. Let's not talk about whether that was the wrong stuff to do, but it feels good to check a bunch of boxes, which is another reason why to-do lists suck.
So I want to talk a little bit about social media. So I have written down here that the average person checks their smartphones 47 times per day, and for millennials this is 86 times per day. And I'm sure with my generation, Gen Z, I'm sure we have the record. I'm sure we crush you guys. So what's your reaction to that stat?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's I shy away from the behavior itself. It's what I care about is the intention behind the behavior, because the former generations were spending way too much time watching television, and before that they read trashy novels or whatever stuff, right? There will always be some kind of distraction. We don't talk about how much time people spend watching sports. Anybody go to a sports bar and in the middle of a big game try and turn off the TV? They will kill you. Like, you will not leave that bar with your life, right? But is that a waste of time? Is that poor use of time? I don't know. What's the difference between playing a video game or going on social media or watching golf on TV? I don't know the difference. Anything you want to do with your time is fine as long as it's done with intent. As Dorothy Parker said, the time you plan to waste is not wasted time. So I got no problem with people being on social media as much as they want, or playing video games, or doing whatever it is they want, as long as that's what they intended to do. If you're using social media as a pacifier, like a baby, because you can't deal with uncomfortable sensations, that's the problem, right? You're doing it instead of being fully present with someone across the table that you're having lunch with. You're doing it instead of accomplishing your best work. You're doing it instead of going to the gym. You're doing it instead of things that you're capable of doing. If you're using these distractions to take you away from uncomfortable sensations you don't know how to deal with, that's the problem. But people can do that with all kinds of medium. People can read too much, watch too much news, watch too much sports, drink too much booze. All kinds of things can take you away from what you said you're going to do. So it's not so much the medium. It's not the social media itself that's the problem. It's how and why we're using it that's the problem.
So, but what do you know about? So there's these algorithms, right? And there's these ways that these companies, there's ways that these companies hook us to stay on their app. What do you know about some techniques that they use? Some techniques that they use to keep us on these apps. Is there anything that they're doing with the algorithms?
Sure. I mean, I think the term, so my first book, Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, was about all this. It came out back in 2012, I think it was. No, 2014. Around that time. And it was the first book to kind of steal the secrets of Silicon Valley to explain how they keep you hooked. And the idea was to expose these secrets so that we could democratize them, so that it wouldn't just be social media companies and gaming companies that are using the techniques. So Duolingo uses the hook model to get people hooked to learning a new language. Fitbod uses the hook model from my book to get people hooked to exercise. There's all kinds of ways that we can use these techniques for good. So I don't want to vilify the techniques themselves. Again, it's how it's applied. And so, the problem is, I think that we want an easy excuse. We want to say, oh, it's Mark Zuckerberg with those crazy algorithms that get us hooked. Look, I wrote the book Hooked. I know all their secrets. I know all their techniques. They're good. They're not that good, right? We're not puppets on a string. We're not all addicted, unless you think you are. Unless you think you are. If you believe, oh, there's nothing I can do about this, social media has me addicted, well, then you're not even going to try. It's called learned helplessness. Yeah. And so this is really what I'm fighting against. Of course these products are designed to be engaging. That's the whole freaking point. Would you like them to not be engaging? Hey, Netflix, right? Stop making interesting movies because I like to watch it a lot? That's stupid. We want social media to engage us. That's the point of the product. And nobody's saying about the psychological hacks that the news media is using. They're using the exact same freaking techniques on us, right? Sports, gambling, all these products are using the same exact secret psychology to get you
podcasts,
hooked.
Us.
Podcasts. Yeah, you're right. Any form of media is using psychological tricks, and it's very fascinating. You can read my book, Hooked, to learn all about it. Same exact, variable rewards are at the center of all this stuff, and there's nothing wrong with it, right? Your job as a podcaster is to make an interesting podcast using many of these same psychological tricks, right? But that's not the problem. The problem isn't that you make interesting content. The problem is how the user use that content for what purpose and how much.
Now, what about the impact that it's having on mental health? social media. Do you think that there's a direct correlation between when social media first started to be on the scene and this uprising of mental health issues that we're seeing, especially with young people?
No, I think that it's, but well, okay, let me back that up. I can't say a strong no. I would say that it's complicated, right? And nobody likes that answer because we like black and white thinking. I think if there's one word that's missing from all debates these days is nuance, right? That nothing is black and white, right? If you want black and white thinking of good guys versus bad guys, I don't know, read Lord of the Rings or something. That's not the real world, right? There's no such thing as good guys and bad guys. It's nuance, right? Is social media good? Yes. Is social media bad? Yes. It depends how you use it, how much you're using it, who is using it. There's all kinds of questions here. When it comes to mental health, I think when it comes to children, you're asking specifically about children or adults specifically?
Honestly, just anyone.
Yeah. So I think, any form of media can, let me back up. Any analgesic, an analgesic is something that solves pain, something that takes away pain. So any analgesic, anything that takes away pain is potentially addictive. We have reported cases of people getting addicted to Tylenol. We have reported cases of people getting addicted to sniffing glue. We have reported cases of people literally getting addicted to water. I'm not kidding. There are cases in the medical literature of people getting addicted to just about everything, right? Now, it turns out that there's a predisposition to addiction, not necessarily a biological predisposition, but more of an environmental. There is, of course, it's called the biosocial model of addiction, where there's many factors that create an addiction, but it's never just the product itself. It's the person, it's the product, and it's the problem they're dealing with in their life, right? So when people have all kinds of problems they can't deal with, they're more likely to seek escape, oftentimes with substances, with media, with something that takes their mind off of their problems. And so when they're freed of those problems, when they learn the skills to deal with those problems, many people cure these addictions. And addiction is not a chronic disease. Most people cure addiction not through AA, not through some kind of recovery program. The most common form of addiction treatment is time. People do what's called aging out of addiction. They have kids, they have a job, they have other things in their life, and they don't need those things to escape reality anymore. That's what most people do. But if you have a predilection for addiction, if you're in that bad place in your life, you're going to find addiction one way or the other. Whether it's too much news, too much booze, too much football, too much Facebook, you can get addicted to just about anything. And of course, these companies are happy to addict you, right? So of course, I think there should be some kind of regulation around people who are addicted. I think people who are addicted should be a protected class of people because these companies know how much you're using. So that's something I've advocated for about a decade now, what I call a use and abuse policy. But that's about 1 to 5% of the population, right? If you actually have a disorder, an addiction disorder that you're really struggling, and these companies, unlike the alcohol companies that have no idea how much you drink, right? They don't know who the alcoholics are. The tech companies do know because they have personal identifiable information of how much you're logging in, how much time you're spending on site. So they could reach out with a respectful message that says, hey, you've used our app, our website for 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week, whatever the case might be. How can we help you? How can we, help you use less if that's what you choose? So I think that should be probably part of of a new regulation. But for the vast majority of people, right, unless you're a child, I think children do need special protections. And we've seen the social media company just last week, Facebook announced that there's all kinds of new protections for teenagers on Instagram, for example. So I think they deserve special protection for children. I think people who are addicted deserve special protection, about 1 to 5% of the population. But everybody else, it's a personal responsibility issue. It's not an addiction. It's just you like it a lot, right? It's a distraction. But of course, we don't like to think of it as a distraction. We like to blame somebody. It's Zuckerberg's fault. It's the media's fault. It's somebody's fault. As opposed to the vast majority of people, if they actually are honest with themselves, it's not an addiction. It's just a distraction. But of course, when we call it a distraction, now I got to do something about it. Now it's my responsibility. That's no fun. Can't I just blame Zuckerberg for my problems?
Yeah. Exactly. What do you think is the biggest misconception that young people have about being an adult?
About being an adult? Okay. So this is a little bit switching gears. I think. Well, the thing that I think shocked me as I grew up was that as a kid, you think people know what they're doing, right? You think that people have their shit together. And then when you become an adult, you realize, and I've met some very, very powerful people in my life, and I will tell you, we're all winging it, right? We're all just trying to, I don't know, we're just trying to figure it out as we go. There isn't some grand master plan. There isn't some, cabal of wise people who are, making sure the world goes in a particular direction. Everybody's just doing their best with all their inadequacies, with all their deficiencies. We're just doing our best, which also means that all the greatest things of mankind were just done by people like you, right? That these things came through deliberate, relentless forward momentum. If you think about all the great things that we've accomplished as a species, right? Exploring the universe, building amazing things, overturning despots, scientific discoveries, breakthrough medicine, they were all accomplished by people who didn't quit, who just kept going relentlessly forward towards achieving their goals. And the only way they could do that was having the focus to stay with that vision. And so that's why I'm so passionate about teaching people how to become indistractable, because what I'm afraid of is that there's a crisis of untapped potential. There are too many people out there who could do so much, who know how much they can accomplish, but they just have so much trouble sticking with that thing. But of course, great things require that focus. They require that relentless forward momentum. And so that's really what I want to teach people how to do.
So my last question is, if you had a minute with your younger self, what would you tell him?
I would probably tell my younger self to not take things quite so seriously. I think when I was younger, I thought stuff mattered more than it did, right? Like I'd get nervous about stuff and I'd get anxious about things. And in retrospect, so many things that when you were a kid just don't frickin' matter, right? Nobody cares, right? Like so many things. And I think that never actually stops, because at the end of the day, and this is kind of what I tell myself even today, when I feel stressed out about short-term problems, I take a step back and I say, wait a minute. Here I am on this tiny blue rock floating in the vastness of space, and I'm lucky enough to be alive in this period. I mean, the improbability that we even exist. Like if you ever do the math of if the Earth was just a little bit farther from the sun, if the sperm and egg that made you didn't exactly connect at the right time, I mean, all the things that had to happen so that you could be right here, right now, listening to the sound of my voice, the odds are mind-bogglingly infinitesimal. And so whenever I feel down or I'm bothered with some triviality in life, when I take that longer-term perspective and just remember how fortunate we are to be alive in this time in history, the greatest time in history, by pretty much every conceivable metric. Like if you're lucky enough to be listening to this on your smartphone, you won the lottery in so many ways, right? And so to me, I wish I would have understood that message when I was younger, because it would have saved me a lot of stress.